Around 2500 BCE, the builders of Stonehenge raised the last of the great stones. And then they vanished. Not because of drought, not because of famine, not because of war in the usual sense. Over the course of several centuries, 9 out of 10 people on the island disappeared from the genetic record. They were replaced. Completely. This was the largest population replacement in the history of Europe, and until recently, no one knew who did it. Now we do. The proof comes from 6 skeletons. 1 lies in a Dutch village, 1 is near Stonehenge, 1 is on an Irish island, 1 is in a cave shaft where 37 people were eaten by their own neighbors, and 2 more, which you will hear about near the end. Each of them has a name, and together, they rewrote the history of an entire island. Who came to the island and erased its original population? Where did they come from, if the myth that the British came from Iberia, or that they were indigenous Celts, collapses under the pressure of fresh DNA evidence? Why do 46 million Anglo-Americans, 38 million Irish Americans, and 8 million Anglo-Australians carry the trace of the same event from 4,000 years ago in their chromosomes? 6 bodies, 1 answer. And maybe it is the answer to your own last name. Witness 1. The man from Oostwoud. In 1956, Dutch archaeologist Albert Egges van Giffen was excavating a burial mound in the small village of Oostwoud Tuitoren in North Holland. Beneath the earthen mound were skeletons. They died around 2400 BCE, centuries before the first Egyptian temple was built in the Giza Valley. They had been laid on their sides. Beside them, clay cups shaped like upside-down bells. Archaeologists call these Bell Beakers. It is the artifact that identifies an entire culture. For more than 60 years, the bodies sat in museum storage as curious but ordinary specimens. And only in 2018, when David Reich's lab at Harvard read their genomes for the first time, did everything change. The Y-chromosomes of the men from Oostwoud, their male lineage, belonged to group R1b, the very same group found in 90% of men in early Bronze Age Britain. Their autosomal DNA, the part of the genome that affects appearance, height, and metabolism, was almost indistinguishable from the DNA of British graves from the Bell Beaker period. The people from Oostwoud and the British of the Bronze Age were, genetically, almost the same population, even though the North Sea lay between them. Some might object. Maybe that was just a coincidence, 2 distant tribes with similar genes. But in February 2026, a new paper by Iñaki Olalde's team in Nature put that question to rest for good. It drew on 112 ancient genomes from the Rhine and Meuse Delta, and it showed that the ancestors of the people from Oostwoud had already been living in that delta for 3,000 years before their birth. That means that, 100 years after the death of the men from Oostwoud, one of their distant relatives got into a boat and ended up in southern England. There he was buried near Stonehenge. Witness 2. The Amesbury Archer. In 2002, 3 miles from Stonehenge, construction workers were laying a pipeline. Their shovels broke into a grave. Inside was a man about 40 years old who died between 2470 BCE and 2239 BCE. At his feet were 5 Bell Beakers. That is a record for all of Europe. At his waist were copper daggers. On his skull were 2 gold earrings, the oldest gold ornaments ever found in the British Isles. The newspapers called him the Amesbury Archer. Scientists later nicknamed him the King of Stonehenge. Isotope analysis of his teeth revealed something shocking. Tooth enamel forms in childhood, and it permanently preserves the chemical signature of the water and food where a child grew up. The archer's enamel was alpine. He grew up in the mountains of Central Europe, most likely in what is now Switzerland or southern Germany. He came to the island as an adult. His Y chromosome belongs to group R-L21, the parent line of all modern British and Irish men who carry R1b. In other words, the archer is the biological forefather of tens of millions of men who today live in London, Dublin, Boston, Melbourne, and the Irish suburbs of Chicago. And this is especially important. For years, archaeologists believed that the Bell Beaker culture was born in Iberia, in what is now Spain and Portugal. But the Archer, who carried that culture into Britain, has no Iberian roots. His DNA points to mainland northwestern Europe. His route ran through the same Rhine-Meuse delta where the men from Oostwoud lay. Iberia gave the world the shape of the cup, but the people who replaced the Britons came from the Low Countries. Right beside the Archer lay another man, his close relative. Witness 3. The Companion. 3 meters from the Amesbury Archer, in the same burial group, archaeologists found a younger man. They nicknamed him the Companion. He died between 2456 BCE and 2146 BCE. He and the Archer shared the same, very rare anatomical variation in the foot, calcaneo-navicular coalition. That happens only among close blood relatives, maybe father and son, maybe uncle and nephew. The exact degree of kinship is unknown, but they were one family. And yet the tooth isotopes of the Companion show that he grew up in Britain. That means his older relative was a first-generation immigrant, and he himself was first-generation British, already local. Between the two of them is the moment of transformation. One was born in the Alps, the other was born on the Salisbury Plain. It is one family in the middle of a relocation, and here is the key detail. The Companion's Y-chromosome is R-L21, the very line carried today by 75% of men in Wales, 82% of men in Ireland, 94% of men in Western Ireland, 37% of all men in the British Isles overall. RL21 was born right here, in the first or second generation of the British grandchildren of people who came from the Rhine-Meuse delta. It is the most successful male lineage in the history of northwestern Europe, and it has an exact birth date. Around 2400 BCE. The place? Southern England. The parents? Immigrants from the continent. If you have a test from 23andMe or Ancestry DNA, and the results say Northwestern European or English and Northwestern European, there is a strong chance you are a direct descendant of the Companion or his cousins. And now the terrifying part begins, because the arrival of these people subsided with catastrophe. 200 years after the Companion, plague reached Western Britain. Witness 4. The woman from Levens Park. Levens Park is an estate in Cumbria, in northwestern England. In 1972, archaeologists found the grave of a woman aged 35 to 45, buried between 2300 BCE and 1700 BCE. Beside her was a Bell Beaker. For decades, the skeleton sat in the Kendal Museum, and no one suspected that a sensation was hidden inside her teeth. In 2023, a team from the Francis Crick Institute in London published a paper in Nature Communications. They extracted DNA of the bacterium Yersinia pestis from her teeth, the very plague bacterium that, 4,000 years later, would cause the Black Death in medieval Europe. This is the first confirmed appearance of plague in the British Isles. And the carrier was a woman from a Bell Beaker community, meaning from the very population that had arrived from the Low Countries. This Bronze Age plague, known to scientists as the LNBA strain, did not yet have the YMT gene, the one that would later make plague deadly through flea bites. But it could already kill. And what is especially eerie is that it appears in several places in Britain from that period. In the Rhine-Meuse Delta, as Olale's 2026 paper showed, hunter-gatherers lived alongside farmers for 3,000 years without losing half of their ancient genetics. They coexisted peacefully. But once their descendants, as part of the new Bell Beaker population, crossed the Channel and reached Britain, replacement moved 10 times faster. Maybe this was not just migration. Maybe the newcomers brought a disease with them, one that the local Britons had no immunity against. Like the Spaniards bringing smallpox to the Aztecs 3,500 years later. And if the myth of peaceful gift-bearing newcomers sounds beautiful, the fifth witness destroys it. Because in one British cave, archaeologists found 37 bodies, And something happened to them that the word migration cannot explain. Witness 5. The child from Charterhouse Warren. Charterhouse Warren is a natural shaft in Somerset, in southwestern England. Depth, 49 feet. In December 2024, a team led by Rick Schulting from the University of Oxford published the results of the finds from this shaft in the journal Antiquity. 37 skeletons. Men, women, and children. All died around 2200 BCE. The bones are shattered by heavy blows. On the finger bones are traces of human teeth. The bodies were butchered, stripped of flesh, and thrown into the shaft. This is the first proof of mass cannibalism in the British Isles. When scientists extracted DNA from the teeth of 2 children in that pit, they found the same Bronze Age plague as in the woman from Levens Park, Yersinia pestis. At 2 different ends of the island, in the same century. Rick Schulting himself admits, the discovery of plague was a complete surprise. We still do not know whether it is linked to violence at the site, and if so, how? Maybe plague and massacre are 2 sides of the same disaster. Maybe a sick community was wiped out by neighbors trying to stop an epidemic. Maybe communities fought over resources amid a demographic collapse. Or maybe what we are seeing is a ritual execution of a tribe that was blamed for spreading the disease. Whatever the cause, the fact remains. At the very moment when the Bell Beaker people were replacing 90% of the British gene pool, things were happening on the island that make any Roman massacre look like an ordinary day. And still, some survived. They crossed the Irish Sea and carried their blood to an island that had never known either Rome or Stonehenge. Witness 6. Rathlin 1. Rathlin is a tiny island off the northern coast of Northern Ireland. In 2006, on a slope by the sea, archaeologists found a burial. Inside was a man scientists named Rathlin 1. He died between 2026 BCE and 1885 BCE. In 2016, an Irish-British team led by Laura Cassidy from Trinity College Dublin published his genome in the journal PNAS. His Y-chromosome was R-DF21, a direct descendant of the same R-L21 as the companion. They were relatives, even if their common ancestor lived about 20 generations earlier. In just 500 years, the Bell Beaker line not only took over Britain, it also crossed the Irish Sea. And here is the key shock. Before the arrival of the Bell Beaker people, Neolithic Ireland had no male R1b chromosomes at all. 0. Today, that line is found in 82% of all Irishmen. In the far west, in counties Galway and Mayo, it reaches 94%. Exactly where the most classic red-haired Irishmen live. Exactly where the Irish Gaelic language survives. Exactly where those seen as the most native people in Ireland retreated for centuries. The most Irish of the Irish are descendants of people who came from a Dutch marsh through southern England in 200 years. 6 witnesses told the same story. The people from Oostwoud showed where they came from. The Amesbury Archer showed how they arrived. The companion showed how their main male line was born. The woman from Levens Park showed that they brought death with them. The child from Charterhouse Warren showed what price everyone paid. And Rathlin 1 showed how far that blood spread in just a few centuries. And here is where all of this leads. Today, 46,600,000 people of English descent live in the United States, 38,600,000 of Irish descent, and 5,300,000 of Scottish descent. In Canada, there are 4,400,000 people of Irish descent and 4,400,000 of Scottish descent. In Australia, there are nearly 8.5 million with English roots. In total, about 150 million people on 3 continents call the British Isles their homeland. And every one of them is a descendant not of Stonehenge, not of the ancient Celts, who in fact did not even exist in the Bronze Age yet, and not of the legendary native Britons from school textbooks. Their real address is the marsh between Amsterdam and Liège, a boat that crossed the North Sea around 2400 BCE, a family from the Alps, a grave near Stonehenge, a relative who stayed behind to grow up on the island, Of course, 4,000 years later, the descendants of those migrants became British in the fullest sense. They built a culture, a language, an empire. No one is taking that away. But if you ask about the genetic root, the root is not on the island. It is in the Delta. David Reich, the world's leading paleogeneticist, said in an interview with New Scientist in February 2026 that the Netherlands once seemed to him the most boring place on Earth. Every inch of it had been walked millions of times. And yet there, under fields and canals, lay the cradle of an entire civilization all along. The British did not come from Britain. They came from the Rhine-Meuse Delta, crossed the Alps, faced plague, wiped out the native builders of Stonehenge, and became the root of the entire English-speaking world. Open your DNA test. If there is a line that says English or Northwestern European, that is not a vague label. It is a mailing address. Oostwoud, North Holland, 2400 BCE. 6 bodies told the whole story.